I'm going to tell you what happened last Thursday night, and yeah, I know how the title sounds. Buckle up, because this gets worse before it gets better. I'm Michael, 31, married to Skylar for 5 years. We met in college when I was working 2 jobs to pay tuition, and she was in a sorority funded by her parents' money. Her dad owns a commercial real estate company. Her mom does whatever wealthy women do when they don't actually work. I'm from a family where my dad drove trucks and my mom cleaned houses. Skylar thought I was authentic and different from the trust fund boys back then. I thought she saw past the money thing. I was wrong. We bought a house 3 years ago. Well, I bought it, put down the entire down payment, took out the mortgage in my name because her credit was garbage. The house is in both our names, though. Remember that detail. Here's what you need to understand about Skylar's social circle. Her friends Cora, Genesis, and Piper are all married to guys with family money or executive positions. They do brunch, wine tastings, charity galas where they spend more on dresses than most people's rent. Skylar has spent 5 years desperately trying to keep up with them while married to me, the guy who thinks a nice dinner costs under 40 bucks. About 2 years ago, I started noticing things. The way she'd change subjects when her friends asked about vacation plans. How she started mentioning this Marcus guy who worked with her dad's company. Marcus drives a Tesla. Marcus just bought a condo downtown. Marcus is taking a trip to Monaco. I'm not stupid. I knew something was building, so I started watching closer. Pulled our phone records through our shared account. Lots of calls to a number I didn't recognize. Checked credit card statements every month. Started keeping detailed records of our finances. Made copies of everything. Every bank statement. Every deed. Every document. The thing is, I wasn't devastated. I was angry. She thought I was too dumb to notice. And I decided right then that whenever this situation exploded, I was going to be ready. Not surprised. Ready. Last Thursday, she told me to meet her at this Italian restaurant downtown at 7. Said her friends wanted to do a group dinner. Casual? I should come after work. I finished early, got there at 6:45, walked in and told the host I was meeting the Skylar party. He pointed toward the back private dining section behind a partition. I walked toward the back and heard it. The partition wasn't soundproof, just decorative. Skylar's voice carried, bright and performative. She was standing, probably doing a toast. To my charity case husband. Keeping him is like community service, honestly. My good deed for humanity. The whole table erupted laughing. I stood there on the other side, maybe 10 feet away, completely still. Cora's voice came next. Girl, you deserve a Nobel Prize for tolerating that loser. Seriously. 5 years? You're a saint. More laughter. Skylar was giggling. Oh my God, stop. But like, he bought me flowers today. Grocery store flowers. Still thinks we're soulmates. It's almost sad. Genesis chimed in. Wait till he finds out about Marcus's penthouse. Have you seen the view? Skylar's voice purred. Why rush it? He's my practice husband. You know, like those ugly starter homes people buy before their dream house? Exactly that. The whole table cackled. Piper said something about my LinkedIn saying happily married. Called it adorable. I stood there for 30 seconds. My hands were steady. I wasn't shocked because I'd known something was coming. But hearing exactly how little she thought of me crystallized everything. I stepped around the partition with a smile, walked right up to their table. Skylar's face went white. Her friends went silent immediately. I kissed her cheek, kept smiling. Sorry I'm late, darling. Traffic was terrible. I looked at her friends. Cora, Genesis, Piper, good to see you all. I sat down next to Skylar. The rest of dinner was spectacular in the worst way. They tried to recover, overcompensating painfully. Skylar kept touching my arm, playing the loving wife, her hand shaking slightly. I acted completely normal. Ordered food, made small talk, laughed at their jokes. Every time Skylar looked at me, I could see her trying to figure out if I'd heard, how much I'd heard. We drove home around 9:30. I didn't say a single word the entire drive. Skylar tried twice to start conversations. Asked if I was okay, if I had a good time. I just drove. Let the silence build until it was physically uncomfortable. When we got home, I went straight to my office, locked the door, spent the next hour going through every file I'd been compiling for 2 years. Bank statements showing I'd paid for everything. Mortgage documents showing the house was my financial responsibility. Phone records showing her constant contact with Marcus's number. Credit card statements showing purchases at hotels I'd never been to. Restaurants she'd claimed were work lunches. I'd been recording our conversations for months. One-party consent state, completely legal. I had dozens of conversations where she'd lied about where she was going, who she was with, what she was doing. Around 11, Skylar knocked, asked if we could talk. I told her I was working on something important. She knocked again 20 minutes later. I ignored it. Then I heard her on the phone, panicked, probably calling Cora or Genesis. I pulled up my contact list and started making calls. First to Ryan, my buddy who's now a divorce attorney. Left a message asking him to call me back, said I needed to discuss asset protection in a potential divorce. Second call to my mom. Told her I might need to stay with her and dad soon. Third call to our mortgage company requesting information about refinancing or removing a co-borrower. Then I logged into our joint bank account. We had a savings account with about $30,000. Money I'd saved from my bonuses, my careful budgeting. I transferred $28,000 into my individual checking account. Left $2,000. Legally, my money. Took screenshots of everything. At midnight, Skylar knocked again, crying, asking why I was shutting her out. I opened the door, looked at her with smeared mascara. I'm fine, just working. Go to bed. I closed the door in her face. I spent the rest of the night researching Marcus, found his LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Marcus Chen, 33, Director of Operations at her father's company. Pictures of him at company events with Skylar's dad. Recent pictures from a charity gala with Skylar in the background. They were careful, no photos together, but they were at the same events. Friday morning, Skylar left for work. My phone blew up with her texts. Are you mad at me? Please talk to me. Did something happen at dinner? I responded once. All fine. Busy day at work. Talk tonight. Ryan called during lunch. We talked for an hour. I gave him the overview. He explained equitable distribution, how to protect myself financially, what documentation I'd need. Told me to keep records of everything. He mentioned if I could prove Skylar's relationship with Marcus was affecting me, professionally or financially. If her father's company gave Marcus special treatment because of an inappropriate relationship with the boss's daughter, that could be relevant. Workplace ethics, professional misconduct, nepotism issues. Friday night, Skylar got home nervous. Asked if we could talk. She started with nonsense about feeling disconnected, worried about communication. Then she asked the real question. Did I hear anything at dinner before I arrived? Because Cora made inappropriate jokes sometimes, and she wanted to make sure I wasn't offended. I smiled, told her I got there exactly when I said, asked why she was worried. She stammered about wanting to make sure I wasn't uncomfortable with her friends. I said they seemed lovely, asked if she wanted takeout. She looked confused but relieved. We ate dinner making small talk. She kept watching me like she was waiting for something to explode. After dinner, I said I was tired, going to bed early. She tried to initiate intimacy. I said I had a headache, rolled over. Saturday morning, I went for a run. Came back, Skylar asked if everything was okay. I said everything was great. She said her friends were planning brunch. I said I had errands to run. After she left, I logged into her laptop. We shared passwords, her idea from years ago. I'd never checked before. Didn't need to, but now I did. Found messages from Marcus going back 18 months. Not explicitly incriminating, just inappropriate. Too friendly. References to private jokes. Mentions of meeting up. Then, I found messages to her friends. Group chat. Scrolled back through months. Dozens of conversations about Marcus. About how he was so much better than me. About how she was planning her exit strategy. About how she just needed to time it right so she didn't lose the house or split assets before she'd secured Marcus completely. There it was. She'd been planning to divorce me on her timeline when it benefited her. She wanted to keep living in the house I paid for while cultivating Marcus until she was certain he'd commit. Then she'd leave, try to take half of everything, and move into his penthouse. I took screenshots, sent them to my personal email and cloud storage she couldn't access. Cleared the browser history. By Thursday, a week from the restaurant, Skylar had relaxed, started to believe I hadn't heard anything, started acting normal. That's when I decided it was time to start applying pressure. Thursday evening, I told Skylar I wanted to refinance the house. Said rates had improved. She said, okay, whatever I thought was best. I pulled out paperwork, asked her to sign. She signed without reading carefully, trusting me. What she didn't notice was the paperwork wasn't for refinancing. It was for removing her from the mortgage, for transferring sole ownership to me, for refinancing under my name only, releasing her liability, removing her from the deed. I'd arranged for a mobile notary Friday evening, told Skylar we needed the paperwork notarized for refinancing. She'd sign. She'd agree. By Friday night, she would no longer own any part of the house she'd been planning to take from me. And that was just step one. Update 1. Okay, so a bunch of you commented on my last post asking for updates. Some of you thought I was moving too fast, some said I wasn't moving fast enough. To the guy who said I should have confronted her immediately at the restaurant respectfully, you're wrong. This needed to be surgical, not emotional. Anyway, here's what happened over the past week, and trust me, it gets complicated. Friday evening, the mobile notary showed up at 7. I'd told Skylar she was coming to notarize our refinancing documents. Skylar had gotten home from work around 6, changed into comfortable clothes, poured herself wine. She was relaxed, thought the worst was over, thought I'd bought her performance from the week before. The notary arrived, professional woman in her 50s, briefcase full of official-looking papers. I'd prepared everything in advance. The actual quitclaim deed was buried in a stack of legitimate refinancing documents. Application forms, disclosure statements. The kind of paperwork that makes your eyes glaze over if you're not paying attention. And Skylar never paid attention to financial paperwork. That was my job. The boring husband stuff, she couldn't be bothered with. We sat at the dining room table. The notary went through each document, asked Skylar to initial here, sign there, confirm her identity. Skylar signed everything without reading, sipped her wine between signatures, made small talk with the notary about the weather, about how tedious refinancing was, about how glad she was that I handled all this boring stuff so she didn't have to think about it. I watched her sign away her ownership of our house and felt absolutely nothing except satisfaction. The notary left around 7:30. Skylar asked if we were done with all the financial stuff now. I said yes, everything was handled. She seemed relieved, said she was going to take a bath, disappeared upstairs with her phone and another glass of wine. I immediately scanned every signed document, uploaded them to 3 separate cloud storage accounts, emailed copies to Ryan, sent copies to my parents. Then, I filed the quitclaim deed online with the county recorder's office, paid the expedited processing fee. By Monday morning, it would be officially recorded. The house would be solely in my name. Skylar had no idea she just made the biggest financial mistake of her life. Saturday morning, I woke up to text messages from Cora. Yeah, Cora, one of the friends from the restaurant disaster. She'd somehow gotten my number, probably from Skylar's phone at some point. The messages started around 8 a.m. We need to talk about Skylar. Something is wrong with her. She's been acting weird since last week. Call me. I deleted the messages. Didn't respond. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Cora calling. I declined. She called again. I declined again. Then she texted that if I didn't call her back, she was coming to our house. Skylar was still asleep upstairs. I called Cora back from my car in the driveway. She answered on the first ring. Started immediately with how worried she was about Skylar. How Skylar had been texting their group chat obsessively. How she seemed paranoid. How she kept asking if they remembered exactly what they'd said at dinner. Whether I'd seemed upset. Whether anyone had noticed anything. I played dumb. Asked what she was talking about. Said Skylar seemed fine to me. Maybe she was stressed about work. Cora insisted something was wrong. Said Skylar had called her crying Friday night after the notary left, saying she felt like something bad was about to happen, but she didn't know what. That's when Cora said something interesting. She said Skylar had confided in her months ago about having feelings for someone at work, that she'd told Skylar it was just a harmless crush, that lots of married people got crushes, that it didn't mean anything, that she'd encouraged Skylar to enjoy the attention because I was, and I quote, probably too boring to notice anyway. So Cora had known, had actively encouraged it, had participated in mocking me while knowing Skylar was emotionally cheating at minimum. I asked Cora why she was telling me this now. She got defensive, said she was worried about her friend, said marriages were complicated, said she thought maybe I should pay more attention to my wife, maybe take her on a nice vacation, maybe try to be more exciting. I told Cora I appreciated her concern, but Skylar and I were fine. Cora said she still wanted to come over and check on Skylar. I told her that wasn't necessary. She said she was coming anyway. She'd be there in an hour. I went back inside. Skylar was awake in the kitchen making coffee. Asked who I was talking to. I said work call. She nodded, distracted. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it and her face changed. Cora had texted her that she was coming over. Skylar asked why Cora was coming. I said I had no idea. Maybe you should ask her. Skylar started texting frantically. Then Cora texted me again. Skylar doesn't want me to come. That's exactly why I'm coming. Something is wrong. An hour later, Cora showed up with Genesis. Both of them marched into my house like they were staging an intervention. Skylar looked mortified. I was in my office, but I could hear everything through the door I'd left slightly open. Cora started immediately. Asked Skylar what was going on, why she'd been acting weird, whether everything was okay with me. Skylar tried to brush it off, said everything was fine. Genesis pushed harder, said they were her best friends. They could tell when something was wrong. She needed to talk to them. And then Skylar broke down, started crying, said she thought I knew about Marcus, that she was terrified I'd heard what they said at dinner, that she'd been waiting for me to explode or leave or do something, but I was acting completely normal and it was making her insane, that she didn't know if I actually hadn't heard or if I was planning something. Cora asked if I'd confronted her about anything. Skylar said no. Genesis asked if I'd mentioned divorce. Skylar said no. Then Cora said maybe I really didn't hear anything. That maybe Skylar was overthinking it. That I was probably just oblivious. But Genesis, bless her suspicious mind, said something that made my blood pump with vindication. She said men don't act this calm unless they're either genuinely clueless or planning something nuclear. That in her experience, when a man goes quiet instead of exploding, that's when you should be really worried. Skylar asked what she should do. Cora suggested she talk to me directly. Ask me if I heard anything at dinner. Genesis said absolutely not. That would just draw attention to it if I didn't already know. Better to act normal and wait it out. Then they started discussing Marcus. Skylar said she'd been seeing him for about a year. That it started as friendship, then emotional affair, then physical. That Marcus had told her he loved her. That he wanted her to leave me, but she was scared because of the money situation. Her friends asked what money situation. Skylar explained that everything was in my name. The house, the savings, the cars. That she'd been trying to figure out how to divorce me without losing everything. That she'd been planning to wait until she had some leverage. Maybe get a better job with her dad's help. Maybe save some money in an account I didn't know about. That Marcus kept pushing her to leave, but she wasn't ready. Cora asked why everything was in my name. Skylar said because I'd handled all the finances, I'd bought everything, her credit was bad from college. Genesis said that was a huge problem. That Skylar was financially vulnerable, that she needed to protect herself immediately. They spent the next hour strategizing, talking about Skylar getting a separate bank account, talking about her asking her dad for money, talking about her consulting a divorce attorney, talking about her securing her position before I could do anything. I recorded every word of that conversation on my phone. Legal in our state. Every admission about the affair. Every plan to financially screw me over. Every piece of evidence I needed. After Cora and Genesis left, Skylar came to my office, knocked on the door, asked if we could talk. I let her in. She sat down, looking nervous, asked if I'd heard them talking. I said I'd heard voices but was focused on work. She nodded. Then she asked me a direct question. Asked if I was happy in our marriage. I looked right at her and said yes. Said I loved her. Said I thought we were good together. She started crying again. Said she loved me too. Said she was sorry if she'd been distant lately. Said she wanted to be better. I asked her what brought this on. She said her friends had her questioning things. Asked if I thought we should go to marriage counseling. I said if she wanted to, we could. She said maybe that would help. I agreed. She left my office looking relieved, thinking she'd bought herself time, thinking she'd successfully manipulated the situation. Sunday. I spent going through everything I'd recorded and documented, organized it into a timeline. Every instance of her lying, every message about Marcus, every conversation about leaving me, every plan to take my money. I had enough to destroy her in a divorce. But I wanted more than just a favorable divorce settlement. I wanted her entire world to collapse the way mine had when I'd heard her mock me as her charity case husband. Monday morning, I called the main office of her father's company, asked to speak to someone in HR, got transferred to the director of human resources, introduced myself, said I had a concern about potential ethical violations involving 2 employees and wanted to report it confidentially. The HR director asked me to elaborate. I explained that I had evidence of a personal relationship between Marcus Chen, a director-level employee, and Skylar, the owner's daughter. That this relationship appeared to have been ongoing for approximately a year. That I was concerned this might represent a conflict of interest or violation of the company's ethics policy. The HR director was silent for a moment, then asked how I had this information. I said I was Skylar's husband, that I'd discovered communications suggesting an inappropriate workplace relationship, that I believed the company should be aware in case this was affecting business decisions or creating liability issues. She asked if I was planning legal action. I said I was considering my options but wanted to do the right thing by reporting this to the appropriate parties first. She said she would look into it, asked if I could provide documentation. I said I could. I sent her screenshots of the messages between Skylar and Marcus, carefully selected ones that were professional enough not to explicitly prove an affair, but inappropriate enough to raise serious questions. Messages about meeting for lunch that seemed too frequent. Messages with personal comments that crossed professional boundaries. Messages referring to private jokes and shared secrets. Tuesday afternoon, Marcus got called into HR. I know this because Skylar came home that evening in a complete panic. Apparently, Marcus had texted her that HR had questioned him about their relationship, that someone had reported them, that he'd denied everything but they were investigating. Skylar asked me if I'd said anything to anyone about her and Marcus. I looked confused, asked what she was talking about. She said never mind, asked if I'd mentioned her friendship with Marcus to anyone. I said no, why would I? She said someone at her dad's company was asking questions and it was making her paranoid. I suggested maybe someone at work had noticed they were friendly and made assumptions. Skylar looked sick, said this could ruin everything. I asked what would be ruined. She backpedaled, said it could make work awkward. I said if she and Marcus were just friends, then they had nothing to worry about. Wednesday, Skylar's dad called her. I heard her side of the conversation from the bedroom while she was downstairs. He was asking about Marcus, asking if there was anything going on, asking if he needed to be concerned about his daughter's judgment. Skylar was crying, denying everything, saying it was all misunderstanding, saying whoever reported this was lying. Her dad apparently didn't believe her, said he was going to have to handle this officially, that if there was something happening between his daughter and one of his employees, it was a massive liability for the company, that Marcus could claim favoritism, that other employees could sue for discrimination, that this was exactly the kind of thing that destroyed family businesses. Thursday morning, Skylar got a call from her mom. Her parents wanted to meet with her. Family meeting at their house Friday evening. Skylar spent all day Thursday alternating between panic and anger. Kept asking me if I thought her dad was overreacting. I said I didn't know the situation well enough to judge. That night, Skylar tried to initiate a serious conversation. Sat me down, said she needed to be honest with me about something. My pulse was steady. This was it. The confession I'd been waiting for. She said she'd made a mistake, that she'd gotten too close to someone at work, that it was emotional, not physical, that she'd developed feelings she shouldn't have, that she was sorry, that it was over now because of the work situation, that she wanted to focus on our marriage. I let her finish, then I asked who. She said Marcus. I acted surprised. Asked how long? She said a few months. I asked if anything physical happened. She said no, just emotional closeness. I asked if she loved him. She said she'd thought she did, but now she realized it was just infatuation because she'd been feeling disconnected from me. Every word was a lie. Every word was exactly what I'd expected. I told her I appreciated her honesty, that I was hurt, but I understood, that maybe counseling could help us. She looked relieved, hugged me, said she loved me, said she'd never let anything like this happen again. Friday evening came. Skylar left for her parents' house at 6. I stayed home, told her I'd give her privacy to talk to her family. She was grateful. While she was gone, I checked the county recorder's website. The quitclaim deed had been officially processed. The house was legally mine. Skylar's name was completely removed from the property. She had no idea that while she was at her parents' house explaining her affair, she'd already lost the house she thought she'd get half of in the divorce. My phone rang around 8. Skylar's mom, asking if I could come to their house. They wanted to talk to me. I said, of course. I drove to the massive house in the expensive suburb where Skylar grew up. Her parents answered the door, looking grim. Skylar was in the living room, eyes red from crying. Her dad asked me to sit. Then he apologized to me, said he'd just learned about what had been happening between Skylar and Marcus, that it was unacceptable, that he was humiliated, that he'd already terminated Marcus's employment effective immediately, that Marcus would not be getting a reference, that he'd made it clear to Marcus that if he contacted Skylar again, there would be legal consequences. Skylar was sobbing. Her mom was trying to comfort her while also looking disappointed. Her dad kept apologizing to me for his daughter's behavior. I sat there listening. When her dad finished, I said I appreciated him telling me that Skylar and I would work through this, that I believed people made mistakes. Her dad looked relieved, said I was being very gracious, that I was a better man than his daughter deserved. We left an hour later. Skylar could barely speak on the drive home. When we got back, she went straight upstairs. I heard her on the phone immediately, calling Marcus. He wasn't answering. She left voicemails, crying, apologizing, saying they'd figure it out. I went to my office and started planning phase 2. Marcus had lost his job. Skylar had lost Marcus. Her parents knew about the affair. Her father was ashamed of her. She thought she'd confessed and been forgiven by me. She still had no idea I'd heard what she said at that restaurant. She still had no idea she didn't own our house anymore. She still had no idea I'd recorded her planning to financially destroy me. And I was just getting started. Update 2. All right. You guys have been blowing up my DMs asking what happened after the meeting at her parents' house. Some of you called me cold-blooded. One person said I was playing 4D chess while she's playing checkers. Honestly, that's exactly what this is. So here's where things got really interesting and, yeah, it's messy. The weekend after Skylar's dad fired Marcus was rough. Skylar spent most of Saturday in bed crying. Kept trying to call Marcus. He'd answer sometimes, but their conversations were short. I could hear her from downstairs begging him not to give up on them, saying they'd figure something out, saying her dad was overreacting. Sunday morning, she came downstairs looking determined. Said she wanted to start marriage counseling immediately. Said she'd already looked up therapists and found one who had availability this week. I said okay. She seemed surprised I agreed so easily. Probably thought I'd resist or make it difficult. The therapist she picked was this woman named Dr. Partition, who specialized in infidelity recovery. Our first appointment was Tuesday evening. We sat in her office, Skylar looking remorseful, me looking like the patient, understanding husband trying to save his marriage. Dr. Partition asked Skylar to explain what had happened. Skylar gave her sanitized version. Said she'd developed an emotional connection with a coworker, that it never got physical, that she'd been feeling disconnected from me and made a mistake, that the relationship was over now and she wanted to rebuild our marriage. Dr. Partition asked me how I felt about this. I said I was hurt but willing to work through it, that I loved my wife, that I believed people deserved second chances. Skylar grabbed my hand and started crying. Then Dr. Partition asked some questions that clearly made Skylar uncomfortable, asked about the timeline, asked what specifically had made her feel disconnected from me, asked if there were other issues in our marriage beyond this affair. Skylar tried to deflect, said it was complicated, said she'd been immature. Dr. Partition pushed, asked if I'd done anything that contributed to her feeling disconnected. Skylar hesitated. Then she said sometimes she felt like we were from different worlds, that my background was so different from hers, that she sometimes felt embarrassed by our lifestyle compared to her friends. There it was. The truth she'd never had the guts to say directly to me. She was embarrassed by me, by my working-class family, by the fact that I didn't come from money, by the fact that I couldn't give her the lifestyle her trust fund friends had. Dr. Partition asked me how I felt hearing that. I said it was painful, but I appreciated her honesty, that I couldn't change where I came from, but I'd always worked hard to provide for us. Skylar said she knew that, said she was being shallow and horrible, said that's why she needed therapy. We left that session with homework. We were supposed to have daily check-ins about our feelings. Skylar was supposed to journal about why she'd been attracted to Marcus and what was missing in our marriage. I was supposed to think about ways I could help her feel more secure. The whole thing was theater, but it served my purposes. It made me look reasonable and forgiving to any outside observers, and it was buying me time to move my remaining chess pieces into position. Wednesday morning, I got a call from Ryan, the divorce attorney. He'd reviewed everything I'd sent him, the recordings, the messages, the financial documents. He said I had one of the strongest cases he'd seen for a fault-based divorce, that with the evidence of adultery and her admitted plans to financially manipulate me, I could likely keep most of our marital assets. But he said there was something I needed to know, the quitclaim deed. I'd had Skylar sign, the one removing her from the house ownership. He'd consulted with a colleague who specialized in real estate law. There was a possibility Skylar could challenge it in court if she could prove she'd been deceived about what she was signing. That judges sometimes set aside quitclaim deeds if one spouse can demonstrate they didn't understand what they were signing. I asked what would make it stick. He said if I could prove she'd had opportunity to read the documents, that she'd signed voluntarily, that she'd had access to legal counsel if she'd wanted it. He said the fact that we'd had a notary present helped, but the best protection would be if the deed stayed uncontested for a while before the divorce proceedings started. If she lived in the house for months after signing without questioning it, that would strengthen the argument that she'd knowingly transferred ownership. So I needed to delay the actual divorce filing. Keep playing happy husband trying to work things out. Let enough time pass that the deed became unassailable. Meanwhile, I could keep gathering evidence and tightening the financial screws. Thursday evening, Skylar came home from work upset. Apparently word had gotten around her social circle about Marcus getting fired. Her friends were asking questions. Cora had called her demanding to know the full story. Skylar had tried to downplay it, but Cora wasn't buying it. Then Skylar told me something that made my whole week. She said Cora was mad at her. That Cora was saying Skylar had put them all at risk with her behavior at the restaurant dinner. That if I had heard what they'd said and was planning something, it could affect all of them. That Cora had a reputation to protect and didn't want to be associated with someone having a tacky affair with a coworker. The rats were turning on each other. Perfect. Friday afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Marcus. Somehow he'd gotten my cell number. The message said he wanted to talk to me man to man, that there were things I should know, that Skylar wasn't being honest with me about their relationship. I didn't respond. 20 minutes later, he called. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message saying he understood I was angry, but that he and Skylar were in love, that their relationship wasn't some casual thing, that she'd been planning to leave me for months, that I deserved to know the truth. I saved the voicemail, added it to my evidence folder. Then I blocked his number. That evening, I told Skylar that Marcus had contacted me. Her face went white, asked what he'd said. I told her he'd left a voicemail saying we needed to talk. She asked if I'd listened to it. I said no, I'd deleted it without listening. Didn't want to hear whatever excuses he had. She looked relieved, then asked if I'd blocked him. I said yes. She hugged me, said she was so sorry, said Marcus was clearly trying to cause problems, said she'd handle it. She called Marcus immediately from our bedroom. I could hear her through the door. She was furious, telling him he needed to stop contacting me, that he was making everything worse, that they were over, that he needed to accept it and move on. He was arguing back, saying she'd promised him things, that she couldn't just cut him off, that he'd left his job for her. Skylar pointed out that he'd been fired. He hadn't left. Marcus said it was semantics, that her father had only fired him because of her, that they were supposed to be together. Skylar said they couldn't be together now. Everything was ruined. He needed to let it go. The call ended badly. Skylar came out of the bedroom looking shaken. I pretended I hadn't heard anything. Saturday morning, Skylar's mom called. Wanted to take Skylar to lunch. Just the two of them. Mother-daughter time. Skylar left around 11. While she was gone, I did something I'd been planning for a week. I went to our bank and closed our joint checking account, transferred all remaining funds to my individual account, opened a new checking account in only my name, updated all the automatic bill payments to come from the new account. Our joint account had about $8,000 in it, money from both our paychecks. Legally, I had every right to withdraw it. We weren't divorced yet, but by closing the joint account and moving everything to an individual account, I was cutting off her easy access to our liquid funds. She still had her own paycheck being direct deposited to her individual account. But all our shared money, all the money that paid our mortgage and utilities and insurance, that was now under my sole control. When Skylar got home from lunch with her mom, she looked tense, asked if we could talk. We sat in the living room. She said her mom had asked a lot of questions about our finances, about whether we had savings, about whether the house was protected. Her mom was worried about her future. I asked why her mom was worried. Skylar said because of everything happening with Marcus. Her parents were concerned about her making another big mistake. Her mom wanted to make sure she was financially secure. That's when Skylar asked me a direct question. Asked if the refinancing we'd done was complete, if everything had gone through properly. I said yes, everything was finalized. She asked if there were any changes to the house ownership. I said the refinancing was just about the loan terms. Why would ownership change? She seemed satisfied with that answer, but I could tell her mom had planted seeds of doubt. Sunday, we went to her parents' house for dinner. Her dad was cold to her, polite to me. Her mom kept watching Skylar like she was waiting for her to screw up again. The whole meal was uncomfortable. After dinner, her dad pulled me aside, asked how I was really doing. I gave him the noble suffering husband routine, said it was hard, but I was committed to our marriage, that I believed Skylar had made a mistake, but that didn't mean our relationship was over. He looked at me for a long moment, then said he respected what I was doing, that Skylar had always been impulsive and entitled, that she'd been spoiled growing up, that he'd hoped marriage to someone with a solid work ethic would ground her, but clearly that hadn't happened, that he was disappointed in her choices. Then he said something that surprised me. He said if things didn't work out between Skylar and me, he wanted me to know he wouldn't hold it against me, that he understood if I decided I couldn't get past the infidelity, that I'd been a good husband and deserved better. He was essentially giving me permission to divorce his daughter, maybe even encouraging it. Monday morning, I woke up to chaos. Skylar was in the bathroom crying. Her phone was on the bed, screen showing an Instagram post. I picked it up. Genesis, one of her friends from the restaurant dinner, had posted a long story post. It was a rant about fake friends who create drama and then expect everyone else to deal with the consequences, about people who drag their friends into their messy situations, about how loyalty has limits when someone shows their true character. She hadn't named Skylar, but anyone in their social circle would know exactly who she was talking about. Skylar came out of the bathroom, asked if I'd seen Genesis's post. I said yes. She said Genesis was being a horrible friend, that she was blaming Skylar for something that wasn't her fault. I asked what Genesis was blaming her for. Skylar explained that Genesis's husband worked in commercial real estate, same industry as Skylar's dad. Apparently, Genesis was worried that the Marcus situation would affect her husband's business relationship with Skylar's dad, that people in their professional circle were gossiping, that Genesis felt Skylar had created a scandal that reflected badly on everyone associated with her. The social fallout was spreading. Skylar's affair wasn't just affecting her and Marcus anymore. It was affecting her entire friend group's social standing and business relationships. Tuesday afternoon, Skylar got a call from Cora. They argued for 20 minutes. Cora was saying Skylar needed to fix the situation. Skylar was saying she couldn't unfiring Marcus or change what happened. Cora said then maybe Skylar needed to keep a lower profile for a while, that showing up at their usual social events right now would be awkward for everyone. Skylar was essentially being frozen out of her social circle. The same friends who'd encouraged her to mock me as her charity case husband were now distancing themselves because her affair had become an embarrassment. Wednesday, we had our second therapy session. Dr. Patterson asked how our week had gone. Skylar broke down, talked about losing her friends, about her parents being disappointed, about feeling isolated, about everything falling apart. Dr. Patterson asked if she was experiencing consequences from her choices. Skylar said yes. Dr. Patterson asked if those consequences were teaching her anything. Skylar said they were teaching her that everyone would abandon her when things got hard. Dr. Patterson pushed back gently, asked if maybe the consequences were teaching her about the importance of integrity and honoring commitments, about how actions have ripple effects beyond just the people directly involved. Skylar got defensive, said it felt like everyone was punishing her forever for one mistake. I sat there saying nothing. Let Skylar dig her own hole. Let the therapist see who she really was. Let it all be documented in therapy notes that could potentially be subpoenaed in divorce proceedings if needed. Thursday evening, Skylar checked our bank account online. I was in the kitchen when I heard her make a sound from the living room. Walked in. She was staring at her laptop, asked me why our joint checking account was closed, why she couldn't access it. I said I'd closed it and opened a new account. She asked why. I said I'd been reading about financial planning during marital crisis, and experts recommended having clear separation of accounts during reconciliation attempts, that it would help us each be responsible for our own spending while we worked on trust issues. She asked where the money from the joint account went. I said it was in a new account that would cover our joint expenses. She said she needed access to that account. I said she had her own paycheck and her own account for her personal spending. She said what if she needed money for something else? I said we could discuss large purchases together like we always did. Her face changed. She was starting to realize she'd lost financial access. She asked me if I was trying to control her. I said of course not. I was just trying to protect us financially during a difficult time. She said it felt like I didn't trust her. I pointed out she'd had an affair, so trust was something we needed to rebuild. She couldn't argue with that logic without admitting. She expected me to trust her completely despite cheating on me. Friday morning, Skylar left for work early. I checked our phone records online. She'd been calling Marcus again. Multiple calls Thursday night after our conversation about the bank accounts. Long calls. Marcus was creating instability, probably offering her an escape route, probably telling her she could leave me and move in with him, probably promising her he'd take care of her financially. What he didn't know was that he'd just been fired and had a mortgage and alimony payments of his own. He couldn't actually afford to support Skylar in the lifestyle she wanted. Friday afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered. It was Marcus. He'd gotten a new number. He said he knew I'd blocked him, but he needed to talk to me. That Skylar was lying to both of us. That she'd told him for months she was going to divorce me and be with him. That she'd said I was controlling and boring and holding her back. That she'd said things about me that I deserved to know. I asked what kind of things. He said she'd told him I was beneath her. That she'd married me because she'd thought she could fix me, make me into someone successful, but that I'd turned out to be a disappointment. That she'd stayed because of the house and because she didn't want to admit failure to her parents. Every word was confirming what I'd heard her say at that restaurant. Every word was making my case stronger. I told Marcus I appreciated the information, that I'd think about what he'd said. He seemed surprised I wasn't angry, asked if I wanted to meet with him. I said maybe. He gave me his new number. I hung up and immediately called Ryan. Told him about Marcus's call. Ryan said this was gold. That Marcus was a potential witness who could testify about what Skylar had said about me, about her plans to divorce me while keeping financial assets. That his testimony could support claims of her bad faith in the marriage. Ryan asked if I wanted to move forward with divorce proceedings. I said not yet. Asked him to give me 2 more weeks. He said whatever I was planning, be careful. Saturday morning, Skylar woke up to an email from the county recorder's office. It was a courtesy notification that public records associated with our property had been updated. She opened it at breakfast, started reading, then went completely silent. She pulled up the county website on her laptop, searched our address, found the recorded quitclaim deed showing ownership transfer to me solely. She stared at the screen for a full minute, then looked at me, asked what this was. I looked at her laptop, said, "Oh yeah, that's from the refinancing paperwork." She said this wasn't refinancing, this was a deed transfer. I said yes, the refinancing required removing her from the deed temporarily. She'd signed the paperwork. Remember the notary? Her hands were shaking. Asked why I'd need to remove her from the deed to refinance. I said it had to do with my credit being better, that the lender required sole ownership under my name to get the better rate, that it was just a technicality. She asked when I was adding her back to the deed. I said I hadn't planned to. She'd signed the quitclaim voluntarily. The house was in my name now. She stood up from the table, asked if I was serious. I said completely serious. She'd signed legal documents transferring ownership. It was done. She started yelling, said I'd tricked her, that she hadn't known what she was signing. I reminded her calmly that a notary had been present, that she'd had opportunity to read every document, that she'd signed voluntarily, that she'd told the notary she understood what she was signing. Skylar grabbed her phone, started calling people, called her dad first. He didn't answer, called her mom, got voicemail, called Cora. Cora answered, and Skylar immediately started explaining what I'd done, that I'd stolen the house, that I'd manipulated her into signing documents. I could hear Cora's response through the phone. She was asking why Skylar had signed something without reading it. Skylar said she'd trusted me. Cora said that was stupid given everything happening. Skylar hung up on her. She turned to me, said she was calling a lawyer. I said okay. Said she should definitely get legal advice. Said maybe her lawyer could explain that quitclaim deeds are legally binding and difficult to challenge. She went upstairs. I heard her making more calls, trying to reach her dad, leaving messages. 2 hours later, her dad called back. Skylar was on the phone with him for 30 minutes. I could hear her crying, hear her explaining what I'd done. When she came back downstairs, her face was blotchy from crying. She said her dad had told her she'd made another massive mistake, that she'd been careless and stupid, that he wasn't going to pay for a lawyer to try to undo something that was her own fault for not reading, that she needed to face the consequences of her actions. Her own father was refusing to help her. She looked at me and asked why I was doing this. I said, doing what? Protecting my assets during a time when she'd admitted to having feelings for another man. That seemed reasonable. She said this was revenge. I said it was self-preservation. She asked if I'd ever forgiven her at all, or if I'd been planning this the whole time. I just looked at her. That's when I saw it click in her eyes. The realization that maybe I had heard what she'd said at the restaurant, that maybe I'd known everything all along, that maybe every kind word and understanding gesture for the past month had been complete performance. She asked me directly, did I hear them at the restaurant? Did I know about Marcus before she told me? I smiled at her, said why would that matter now? Everything was already done. She backed away from me, said I was cruel, said she'd never seen this side of me. I said she'd never bothered to look. She grabbed her keys and her phone, said she was leaving, going to stay with friends. I said okay, reminded her to take everything she needed because the locks would be changed by tomorrow. She froze, asked if I was serious. I said completely serious. This was my house now. She'd have to find somewhere else to live. She started screaming, saying I couldn't do this. I said I absolutely could. She lived in my house. I could ask her to leave any time. She said she'd call the police. I said go ahead. They'd tell her this is a civil matter and she'd need to go through the courts, which would take weeks. And in the meantime, she'd be staying somewhere else while I lived here. She ran upstairs. I heard her throwing things into bags. Heard her slamming drawers and closet doors. 40 minutes later, she came down with 2 suitcases and her work bag. She stood at the door, said this wasn't over, that she'd fight me, that I was going to regret this. I told her I'd see her at our marriage counseling appointment Tuesday. She looked at me like I was insane. I said, what? We're still trying to work on our marriage, right? That's what we told Dr. Partition. She left without another word. I stood in my house, quiet for the first time in weeks, and pulled out my phone. Opened the recording from the restaurant that I'd been saving. The one where she'd called me her charity case husband, her practice husband, her ugly starter home. Time to show her what happens when you underestimate the charity case. Final update. Okay, final update. And yeah, this is long, but you asked for it. Shout out to everyone who said burn it all down. Because that's exactly what happened. Some of you thought I was being too calculated. Well, you're about to see why calculated was necessary. Sunday after Skylar moved out, she stayed with Cora. I know because Cora posted an Instagram story about unexpected house guests. By Monday morning, Skylar had blown up my phone with texts alternating between begging me to let her come home and threatening legal action. I responded to exactly one message telling her our counseling appointment was still scheduled for Tuesday at 6. She showed up to Dr. Patterson's office looking exhausted. We sat in the waiting room not speaking. When Dr. Patterson called us in, Skylar immediately launched into how I'd kicked her out of her own home, how I'd manipulated her into signing away her rights to the house, how I'd been pretending to forgive her while secretly planning to destroy her. Dr. Patterson asked me if this was accurate. I said mostly yes, said I'd been strategic about protecting my assets after discovering the extent of Skylar's affair and her plans to divorce me while keeping my money and property. Dr. Patterson asked what plans I was referring to. That's when I pulled out my phone, told Dr. Patterson I wanted to play something. Skylar's face went white. She asked what I was doing. I said providing context for our marital issues. I played the recording from the restaurant. The whole thing. Skylar calling me her charity case husband. Her friends calling me a loser. Skylar giggling about the grocery store flowers. The practice husband comment. The ugly starter. The home comparison. Her friends cackling about my LinkedIn profile. All of it. Dr. Patterson sat there listening. Skylar was crying before it finished. When the recording ended, Dr. Patterson asked when this had occurred. I said about 6 weeks ago. She asked if this was the dinner where I'd arrived to meet Skylar and her friends. I said yes. Dr. Patterson looked at Skylar, asked if she remembered saying these things. Skylar was sobbing, said she'd been drinking, that her friends brought out the worst in her, that she didn't mean it, that it was just talk. I asked her which part she didn't mean, the part where she called keeping me community service, or the part where she said I was her practice husband before her dream house. Skylar said she was trying to impress her friends, that they had a toxic dynamic where they competed to sound the most callous, that it wasn't how she really felt. I asked about Marcus's penthouse then, about her exit strategy, about timing it right so she wouldn't lose the house. Skylar went silent. Dr. Patterson asked me how long I'd known about the affair. I said I'd suspected for about 2 years, had confirmed it through phone records and eventually through her own messages to her friends about planning to leave me, that everything I'd done since that restaurant dinner had been about protecting myself from someone who viewed me as a temporary placeholder. Skylar tried to argue, said if I'd known for 2 years, why did I stay? I said I stayed because I was waiting for her to make her move so I could destroy it, that I'd spent 2 years documenting everything, securing my assets, building my case, that the moment I heard her mock me to her friends, I knew it was time to execute. Dr. Patterson said this was clearly not a marriage that could be saved through counseling, that we were beyond reconciliation, that we should both seek individual therapy and legal representation. Skylar asked if Dr. Patterson was refusing to treat us. Dr. Patterson said she was referring us elsewhere because this situation required legal intervention, not couples therapy. We left that office and Skylar followed me to my car in the parking lot, started yelling about how I'd ruined her life, how I'd turned her parents against her, how I'd gotten Marcus fired, how I'd stolen her house, how I'd isolated her from her friends. I asked her if she was hearing herself, if she understood that every single consequence she was experiencing was directly caused by her own choices. She said I could have just divorced her like a normal person. I said normal people don't mock their spouses as charity cases and then plan to financially exploit them in a divorce. She said she never would have actually taken everything from me, that she'd been venting to her friends but wouldn't have followed through. I pulled out my phone again, showed her screenshots of her messages to Cora and Genesis about timing the divorce to maximize her financial gain, about keeping me on the hook while she secured Marcus, about making sure she got the house. She grabbed for my phone. I pulled it away. She said I'd violated her privacy by reading her messages. I said she'd violated our marriage by planning to screw me over. She said she wanted to go to court, wanted a judge to see what I'd done. I said perfect, let's do that. Wednesday morning I filed for divorce. Ryan had everything ready. Petition citing adultery, request for exclusive possession of the marital home, request for equitable distribution of assets heavily in my favor based on my financial contributions and her marital misconduct. Attached as evidence were the recordings, the messages, the financial documents showing I'd paid for everything. Skylar got served Thursday afternoon at work. She called me screaming, said I'd humiliated her by having her served at her father's office. I said I'd had her served at her place of employment because she didn't have a stable residence anymore. She said she was staying with Cora. I said then she should have provided that address. Friday, Skylar's first attorney called Ryan, some guy her dad had recommended. He opened with aggressive posturing about challenging the quitclaim deed, about pursuing spousal support, about seeking half of all marital assets, including my retirement accounts. Ryan let him talk. Then Ryan sent him our complete evidence file. The attorney called back 2 hours later, said he needed to discuss something with his client, said the case was more complicated than she'd initially represented, that he'd be in touch. Monday morning, that attorney withdrew from representing Skylar. She called me hysterical. Said the lawyer had told her she had no case, that the quitclaim deed was legally binding, that the evidence of her affair and her admitted plans to financially manipulate me meant she'd be lucky to walk away with anything, that he wouldn't take her case because it was unwinnable. She hired a second lawyer Tuesday. This one lasted 3 days before also withdrawing. Apparently, Skylar kept insisting she could prove I'd tricked her into signing the deed, but she couldn't explain why she'd signed documents without reading them, why she'd told the notary she understood what she was signing, why she'd lived in the house for weeks after signing without questioning it. During this time, Marcus was creating his own problems for Skylar. He'd found out she was being served with divorce papers and thought this meant they could finally be together. Started texting her constantly, showing up at Cora's house where she was staying. Cora called me Wednesday night, actually called me, asking if I could do something about Marcus because he was harassing Skylar at her house, and she wanted him gone. I asked Cora why she thought I would help Skylar with anything. Cora said because Marcus was becoming unstable. Because he'd been driving by Cora's house multiple times a day. Because he'd left flowers on the doorstep. Because he'd sent messages saying he and Skylar belonged together and that I was the only obstacle. I told Cora that sounded like a problem for the police, not for me. She said fine, but if anything happened, it would be partially my fault for destroying Marcus's life. I said Marcus destroyed his own life by having an affair with his boss's daughter while working at a family company. That these were consequences, not persecution. Cora hung up on me. Thursday, Genesis called me. Yes, Genesis. The one who'd posted the Instagram rant about fake friends. She wanted to know if I was planning to mention her and the other women in the divorce proceedings, if their names would come up, if there would be any public record of them being present at the restaurant dinner. I asked why she was worried. She said her husband was in business with several people in Skylar's dad's professional circle. That if it came out she'd been encouraging Skylar's affair and mocking me, it could damage their reputation. That her husband was already angry at her for being involved. I told Genesis I would testify truthfully about everything that happened. That if the court asked who was present when Skylar made those statements about me, I would provide names. Genesis said I was being vindictive. I said I was being honest. She said she'd been a good friend to me over the years. I asked when. She couldn't answer. Then Genesis said something that made me actually laugh. She said she'd never actually thought I was a loser, that she'd just been going along with what Skylar said, that the things they'd said at the restaurant were just drunk talk. I asked if she'd be willing to testify to that in court, to testify that Skylar had regularly disparaged me to her friends, that this wasn't a one-time incident, but a pattern. She said no. I said then we had nothing to discuss. Friday afternoon, Skylar's dad called me, asked if we could meet. I agreed. We met at a coffee shop near his office. He looked tired, said the past month had been hell for his family, that Skylar's mother was devastated, that they'd raised their daughter better than this. Then he said he'd seen the divorce petition, that his attorney had obtained a copy, that he understood now why I'd reported the Marcus situation to HR, that I'd been protecting myself. He said he couldn't blame me. He asked if there was any possibility of settling this quietly, of avoiding a court trial. I said that depended on what Skylar was willing to accept. He asked what I wanted. I said I wanted the house, my retirement accounts, my savings. And I wanted her to acknowledge in the settlement that the marital breakdown was caused by her infidelity. He said that seemed fair, asked if I'd be willing to give her anything. I said she could have her car, which was already in her name, her personal belongings, and I'd pay her $2,000 as a final settlement. He looked shocked, said $2,000 was nothing. I said it was $2,000 more than the $0 she deserved after calling me her charity case husband. He asked if I'd really heard all of that. I said every word. He said he wished he'd known, that he would have handled things differently with Marcus, with Skylar. I said it worked out fine. He asked if I hated his daughter. I said I didn't hate her. I just didn't care about her anymore. He said he'd talk to Skylar, try to convince her to accept a reasonable settlement, that going to trial would only make everything public and more humiliating for everyone involved. Saturday, Skylar showed up at the house. My house. I'd had the locks changed the week before, but she was on the front porch ringing the doorbell repeatedly. I opened the door. She looked awful, asked if we could talk. I said no. She said please, that she needed to understand why I was being so cruel. I stepped outside onto the porch, closed the door behind me, told her I wasn't being cruel, that I was being exactly what she'd trained me to be, a practical person who understood that some things can't be fixed and should just be ended efficiently. She said she'd loved me once, that what we had was real in the beginning. I said maybe, but what she'd felt at that restaurant was also real. What she'd planned with Marcus was real. What she'd said to her friends about me being a disappointment was real. Those things couldn't coexist with love. She asked what she could do to make this right. I said accept the divorce settlement I was offering. Sign over all claims to the house and my assets. Acknowledge her infidelity in writing. Walk away. She said that would leave her with almost nothing. I said yes. She tried a different approach. Said I was successful now, that I had a good job and savings in the house, that I didn't need to take everything from her, that she'd made mistakes, but that didn't mean I should financially devastate her. I reminded her that she'd planned to do exactly that to me, that her messages to her friends had explicitly discussed leaving me with as little as possible while taking the house I'd paid for. She said that was just talk. I said the quitclaim deed she'd signed while planning to screw me over was not just talk. It was legally binding reality. She said she'd find another lawyer, someone who'd fight for her. I said good luck. She'd already been through 2 who'd quit when they saw the evidence. She left crying. Cora texted me an hour later, said Skylar was having a breakdown at her house, that she was drinking and talking about how her life was over. that Cora didn't know what to do with her anymore. I didn't respond. Sunday, I drove to my parents' house, told them everything was moving forward with the divorce. My mom asked if I felt guilty at all. I said no. She asked if I thought I'd been too harsh. I said Skylar had spent years viewing me as lesser than her, as a temporary embarrassment, as something to be upgraded from, that she'd gotten exactly the same level of consideration from me that she'd given me. My dad said he was proud of me, that walking away from disrespect was harder than most people realized, that knowing your worth wasn't cruel, it was necessary. Monday morning, Skylar hired a third lawyer. This one called Ryan Tuesday afternoon, said his client was willing to negotiate, that she understood the house was mine, that she was willing to acknowledge the affair, but that she wanted more than $2,000, that she needed money to secure an apartment and restart her life. Ryan asked what amount she was thinking. The lawyer said $50,000. Ryan laughed, said my final offer was $5,000 and that was generous, considering she'd contributed nothing to our marital assets and had admitted to planning to defraud me in a divorce. The lawyer said he'd discuss it with his client. Wednesday, that lawyer called back. Skylar would accept $10,000. Ryan said $7,000 and that was final. Take it, or we'd see them in court where she'd get nothing. Thursday, the lawyer called back. Skylar accepted. The settlement was drafted Friday. Skylar got $7,000, her car, her personal belongings, and nothing else. She acknowledged in writing that the marriage ended due to her extramarital affair. She released all claims to the house, to my retirement accounts, to my savings. The divorce would be finalized in 60 days. I signed the papers Monday. Skylar signed them Tuesday. Her dad called me Tuesday evening. Said Skylar had moved back in with them temporarily while she looked for an apartment she could afford, that she was devastated financially and emotionally, that she was learning hard lessons about consequences. I said I hoped she learned them well. Wednesday, I got a message from Marcus. He'd somehow gotten my email, said he and Skylar were done, that she'd told him she couldn't be with him after everything that happened, that he blamed me for destroying their relationship, that I'd ruined 2 lives out of spite. I wrote back, told him he'd ruined his own life by having an affair with a married woman who worked for her father, that he'd been fired for legitimate ethical violations, not because I was vindictive, that Skylar had been using him as an escape plan and had dropped him the moment that plan failed, that he should move on. He responded with more angry messages. I blocked him. Thursday, Cora posted on Instagram about cutting toxic people out of your life. Genesis posted about fake friends who drag you into their drama. Piper, who'd been mostly quiet through all of this, posted about being grateful for her husband and not taking good relationships for granted. The friend group had completely fractured. They'd all been complicit in mocking me, in encouraging Skylar's affair, in treating our marriage like a joke, and now they were turning on each other to protect their own reputations. Friday, I got a text from Skylar, from a new number I didn't have blocked yet. She said she'd found an apartment she could afford with the settlement money, that she was starting over, that she hoped I was happy with what I'd done, that someday I'd regret being so cold. I wrote back one last time, told her I'd regret nothing, that she'd called me her charity case husband, her practice husband, her ugly starter home, that she'd planned to use me until she could upgrade to Marcus's penthouse, that she'd gotten exactly what someone who views people as disposable commodities deserves. I told her that every time she sat in her cheap apartment struggling to make rent, she should remember that she'd once lived in a house she could have owned half of, that every time she drove her aging car, she should remember she'd thrown away a stable marriage, that every time her former friends ignored her, she should remember that she'd built relationships on mockery and superiority instead of genuine connection. I told her to remember that the charity case husband she'd looked down on had beaten her at every single move, that the practice husband had been smarter, more strategic, and more ruthless than she'd ever imagined possible, that the grocery store flowers guy had destroyed her financially and socially while staying completely within the law. I told her that I hoped she learned something from all this, but honestly, I didn't care if she did or not. Then I blocked her number. The divorce was finalized 60 days later. I kept my house, my retirement accounts, my savings, and my self-respect. Skylar got $7,000 and the permanent knowledge that she'd underestimated the wrong person. Her dad stopped speaking to her for 3 months according to mutual acquaintances. Her mom was still trying to repair their relationship. Cora and Genesis didn't invite her to social events anymore. Marcus moved to a different city, and me, I kept the house I'd paid for. The house she'd called her ugly starter home before her dream house. The house she'd planned to take from me in a divorce. The house that was now entirely, legally, solely mine. I never did buy her expensive flowers. Grocery store flowers were always good enough for someone who never actually valued them anyway. To everyone who said I was cold-blooded, yeah, I was. Because warm-blooded gets you mocked at restaurant dinners and divorced with nothing. And to everyone who said I should have just confronted her immediately, this is what patience gets you. Complete victory. Final score, charity case husband 1, practice wife 0.